We're standing here today in the east wing of Buckingham Palace, which many people will be familiar with because, of course, it is the famous facade of the palace that faces the Mall. We're standing at the moment in the centre room, which, as its name suggests, is right in the centre of the principal floor. And it's this room that leads to the famous balcony, the site of many important appearances by members of the royal family, such as the jubilees of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and more recently, the coronation of His Majesty King Charles III and Queen Camilla. But when we step inside from the balcony, all around us we see something perhaps a little bit surprising. And that's because this room and the other important rooms in the East Wing, the Yellow Drawing Room, and also the principal corridor, contains many works of art in what we call the chinoiserie style. And this was a very fashionable style using Chinese and some Japanese works of art, some of them mounted by European makers in England and France to furnish residences. George IV was one of the biggest fans of chinoiserie style and used it at all his residences, notably at Brighton Pavilion. And it was after the pavilion was sold by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert that all of those furnishings were brought here to Buckingham Palace to furnish the new East Wing.
During the 1820s, George IV had commissioned essentially the conversion of a royal residence that belonged to George III, Buckingham House, into a palace. However, he had died before he could occupy the palace, and indeed it was his niece, Queen Victoria, who became the first British monarch to move into the newly renovated Buckingham Palace in 1837. By 1845, it was becoming increasingly clear that Buckingham Palace wasn't large enough for Queen Victoria and her then 4 children, and the architect Edward Blore was then commissioned to draw up plans for a new wing to Buckingham Palace. Between 1847 and 1849, the new East Wing was added to Buckingham Palace. At Albert's suggestion, a balcony was actually added to the front of the palace. This gave the royal family a platform on which to be seen and to connect with the public.
The East Wing was financed mostly through the sale proceeds of the Royal Pavilion in Brighton, which had been George IV's pleasure palace. When the decision was made to sell the Royal Pavilion, Queen Victoria thought that the building would be demolished, so the decision was made to strip out not only the artworks but the fixtures and fittings from the Royal Pavilion. Prince Albert was really the driving force with the reuse of these in the East Wing. So many of the artworks and fixtures and fittings were incorporated into the rooms on the principal floor. Behind me are a number of objects that came from the Royal Pavilion. The Chinese wallpaper was rediscovered by Queen Mary, and it had been stored at Kensington Palace, where many of the fixtures and fittings had been transported in 1847 to 1849. Queen Mary took the decision to rehang it here in the Yellow Drawing Room. Also in this room, we see the fantastic fireplace. This was one of over 40 fireplaces which were jemmied off the walls from the Royal Pavilion and placed here in Buckingham Palace. On top of the fireplace are a pair of Chinese porcelain bottle vases and the Kailing clock. The Kailing clock consists of chopped up Chinese vases and possibly a teapot, as well as these wonderful gilt bronze motifs for the sunflower, which was George IV's motif. In the centrum here at Buckingham Palace, there is a wonderful chandelier, which was one of 9 made for the music room at the Royal Pavilion. It's in the shape of a lotus flower, and the idea was that you'd have the impression of these 9 floating lotus flowers from the ceiling. In front of the mirrors, we have a pair of Chinese export porcelain vases. They were originally oil lamps, but have now been adapted to modern life with electricity. Here in the principal corridor, we have 4 magnificent large pagodas. They were added to by George IV with these hexagonal bases and the gilt bronze arrowheads at the top, making them 14 foot high to look incredibly impressive in the music room where they sat between the piers and the windows.
So we're here in the principal corridor, and the paintings here really reflect the Victorian history of this part of the palace. This large painting by William Palfrith was commissioned by Queen Victoria to commemorate the marriage of Albert Edward, the future Edward VII, and Princess Alexandra of Denmark. One of the things that Frith is so good at was his ability to capture mood and character as well as just likeness.
Over the last 5 years, the East Wing has been subject to the 10-year resurfacing programme to replace the essential services in the building and to improve the building and make it fit for future generations. What this has afforded the Royal Collection is the great opportunity to conserve many works of art which were previously inaccessible or that hadn't been attended to for many, many years.
In 2023, this painting was one of the paintings conserved as part of the Buckingham Palace resurfacing project. Deformations along the edges and in the corners were consolidated and reinforced to ensure that this painting can be enjoyed by future generations.
That conservation has been so important, and we now have a collection of beautiful works of art which are conserved and will be in great condition for future generations. And of course, now the opportunity for visitors to Buckingham Palace to see these spaces for the very first time.